Buying a home on Lake Norman can be an excellent investment, but you may want to reconsider. From being misinformed and uneducated about the lake, purchasing on the waterfront can be full of surprises. So in this video, I'm going to share 6 types of homes you should look out for on Lake Norman. And along with that, I'll show you examples to make sure you're well informed and you don't make these critical mistakes. So stick with me, as I do not want you to spend $1, $2, $3, or $4 million on a home and then look back and say, I wish I knew that. Now, before we dive in, my name is Mitch. I'm a luxury real estate broker here in the Charlotte and Lake Norman areas. And if this video provides you any value, please do me a favor, like and subscribe, as I produce videos just like this every single week to keep you educated and well informed on all things real estate. But let's jump in. Let's start with the most overlooked factor: homes with poor water depth. With Lake Norman's fluctuating water levels, many coves drop 3 to 6 feet every single year. This might not sound like much, but shallow coves can mean the difference between you having a great summer or your boat sitting on dry land. Imagine when you're trying to enjoy your boat and all of a sudden you realize in the summer the cove is real shallow and you can't get it out. Believe me, this happens and they are out there. So here's the key. Aim for at least 9 to 10 feet of water depth at the end of the dock, especially if you're planning on installing a boat lift. The reason why this is really important, because there's a lot of finger coves around Lake Norman. And during the summer at full pond, you may say, wow, this is great water. But then in the wintertime, when Duke drops the water level anywhere between 3 to 6 feet, those coves can simply get really, really shallow, in some cases even muddy, where you can't even use the boat anymore and you have to pull it out of the water, or you can't even get the boat out. This will impact the long-term future appreciation of the property, and usually it's the first thing I tell my clients is we need to make sure the water depth is correct of the home you're purchasing, because that can have a monster impact on the value. I would also look out for homes with old docks. Now, if you're not familiar with Lake Norman and the process to renovate and rehab these docks, believe me when I tell you this, I've been through many. It is not a cheap ticket to rehab a dock on Lake Norman. Now, you may look at a property and you may say, wow, the water's great and that dock's a little shabby. I can just go out there, have a handyman fix some boards. Let me stop you right there. Duke is very specific on what work you can have done in that dock. If for any reason there needs to be pier work, you change the footprint, you want to put a covered dock on it so your boat lift can be underneath it. All this needs to be submitted through Duke, engineers stamped, architectural reviewed, and it is very expensive. A lot of those covered docks you see on Lake Norman, especially the newer ones, those could easily be $150,000 to $250,000 plus to have those installed, and it is a long process. So my advice to you is this: if you come across a home with an old dock, just keep in the back of your mind that's $100,000 to $200,000 to get it up to speed. Speaking of docks, let's talk about them. Did you know that Duke Energy controls all the docks on Lake Norman? If the dock on the property you're considering wasn't permitted, or worse, was modified without approval, you could be in a world of trouble. Every dock should have a small metal tag tacked on the side of it, issued by Duke. But don't stop there. You need to verify that permit tag with the actual paper permit that's on file with Duke Energy. That needs to be requested by the official owner of the property. So the real estate broker, the attorney, or the buyer's agent cannot request this. This has to come from the official owner. So my tip is this: if you're looking at a home that has an unpermitted dock, you should request the seller, get that paper permit, and you match it against the tag that's on the dock, making sure that the floor plan and the footprint of that dock matches that paper permit. Because if it doesn't, that means Duke will not transfer the permit to the new owner until that is corrected. This is a big deal and can stop a closing in its tracks. So in my opinion, definitely look out for these types of things on Lake Norman, because it's a very old lake. It's been around a long time, and people have modified these docks, and a lot of people don't even know about these rules. But you're going to want to keep this in mind. I would also be wary of homes with tight buffers. So there's a 50-foot buffer on Lake Norman. This is a vegetative limit that restricts you from building anything permanent or structural in this zone. If you're dreaming of like a lakeside pool, outdoor kitchen, you got to make sure the shoreline allows for it, and that 50-foot buffer does not encroach on where you want to put any type of structure or items you want to do with that property. My advice is this: definitely get a survey done on any waterfront property you have. That will show you where the 50-foot buffer line is. And then, of course, From there, you can decide if you have enough room to put a pool in, etc. This is very important because if you're not familiar with Lake Norman, when you first get here, you may say, wow, there's a ton of shoreline here. In green space, I can put this monster pool in. And you got to remember the 50-foot buffer line comes up off that lake, which can restrict a lot of your property from being used for anything but just green space. So keep this in mind. I would also stay away from homes that do not have a lot of privacy. Lake Norman has a ton of homes on it with the 500 miles of shoreline. You need to make sure that if you're going to spend $2 or $3 or $4 million, that the view and the privacy you're comfortable with, and also keep in mind that when you go to resell that property down the road, is another buyer going to be okay with maybe how private or not private it is? Also, Lake Norman has a lot of areas around it that are not included in an HOA, which means there's no restrictions. I've seen a ton of Airbnb investors snack up some of these properties. The last thing you want to do is purchase a lake home for maybe $3 million and you realize next door is an Airbnb and you have new tenants every single week for 16 weeks of the season during the high season. Big time issue. Therefore, my advice to you is make sure you're comfortable with the privacy, and of course you're working with an agent that really understands to check all these things, because you do not want to be that person that purchases the property and you realize that the privacy wasn't quite right. You go to sell it down the road and you're not going to get the dollar you want for it. Now, construction on Lake Norman is booming, but here's what I would stay away from: homes with open permits. This can be a big deal and the seasoned eye will catch it. This is why. A lot of people, right, are rehabbing their homes. Maybe they hired a contractor to do all the work. They're not really in tune of exactly what he's doing. He said he pulled permits, but they never came out to re-inspect to make sure that those permits were closed. And maybe he told that homeowner everything's good and away he went. Well, guess what? Now there's open permits, which means the county never checked if that work was done correctly. And if you take possession of that property, that is now your responsibility and it's your headache. So if you ever go to resell the property, it's an issue. The number one issue, of course, is was the work done correctly? But also, it's like, hey, that's a red flag. What actually happened here? Why did they hire a contractor that pulled permits and never had them closed? This is why I would look out for homes that have open permits on them, because it can be a major headache for you if you take possession of them.